All right, so I'm here to talk to you tonight about a project that I recently completed. For most people in the room, you're familiar with the Vicenza program, but it's a program where we go and study, and for those of you who don't know, just draw. And the entire program is focused around drawing and living in a city and just completely immersing yourself there, which I found to be really exciting. This is actually drawings that I've completed before when I was an undergrad, which is most of what my drawing experience had been. It was about rendering, not really about sketching. So for this program, I really wanted to focus on learning to quickly capture a space and understand what were the important characters, but do it in a way that wasn't necessarily rendering every aspect. So I'd seen all the previous drawings before, and the first drawings that I did brought a tear to my eye, but they were not tears of joy. These were definitely tears of frustration and anger that I couldn't figure out what I was doing. I was literally drawing every brick in some drawings, and I was like, what am I doing here? What am I trying to do? So Charlie, I talked to him, and I was like, so Charlie, what am I doing wrong? He's like, well, get out your ugly line. Just draw the ugliest line you possibly can. And this is actually what I did. And whenever I did it, I was like, well, I actually kind of like that. That's the first drawing I've actually done that was pretty awesome. So from there, I kind of took it that I was really trying to force and put too much control over what I was trying to do. And I really just needed to let these drawings come out. And I needed to let my hand do what it had been trained to do for many years and just let that come. So these are first some images from the Villa Capra where I just began to draw just the important characters, figuring out in a drawing what those are and rendering those first. And I mean, in amazing landscapes like Cinque Terre, where the land is such an important factor, rendering that land versus the buildings, just leaving the buildings to be themselves and understanding that the landscape is what was really important there. So that really began to be, as I was drawing, I began to understand what these different characters are. And from that, I mean, it was an easy jump to building and landscape and understanding how the different buildings, and also, I mean, even coming down to understanding that I didn't have to draw the first set of trees, that I could begin to render things in different ways and understand how to pull those different images out. And I think this also brings up another important part of the quick sketch. We were always asked to do a quick 45-second, very quick sketch, which is the one on the left, and then maybe build upon that sketch in a different way. And I think that it definitely brought out different characters of a place through these different iterations, which I think was an important part. This is another drawing that I did, which was just churches by Vaporetto. So I jumped on a train or on a Vaporetto and traveled the city, and I would get about 20 seconds to draw a church as we passed around a corner or went to a different area. So it was just really looking at that, trying to understand it, and dropping it down. And this also began to lead, as I came back and began to look at my sketches, I was like, well, what are some important themes? And I began to really focus on these informal gathering spaces, because I think that's where a lot of my drawings were done. There are these areas where I could sit under a tree, under an awning, in a space, and they were these ephemeral spaces that were just kind of haphazardly put together, but that they really became inviting to sit in. And I guess the most important formal gathering space was the dining table, where a lot of sketches were done with food and wine. I think that really helped me to loosen up a little bit too, and they really became important. And while we were sitting there, we just began to look at things around us and understand those vernacular building styles that have been built up over many years. And I mean, even down to these were window sketches, and looking at the windows in the casa and the multi-layers in them and trying to understand how those things work. I really began to get fascinated by those details. And I think by the end, I was really just sick of drawing Palladio. So this was a sign that pointed to one of the Palladio buildings that I found an interesting detail just in the sign of how a bar came through a piece of corten and how it had been folded up. And I found that really beautiful. So kind of sketched that. Whew. I have a pause right now. Take a break. And also just looking at those other spaces like the market bus, something that just pulls in and can create a space within a space. And this is a space of very high activity. There's people congregating. It's a social space. And it's definitely lifeblood of Vicenza. Market days were our favorite days there. And I mean, you get the best rotisserie chicken. And this is the last image of the sketchbook. And this was just the Scaletta, and understanding, the different forms. This was a space that dwarfed you whenever you went in, and just the way that it worked to orient you was amazing. And this draw from, this is from later in the semester or later in the class. It was much better, and I wasn't crying over this one. So this leads me to, whenever you come back, the big question of how do you represent these things. So this is my desk, and it's definitely a whirlwind of activity. And as I was sitting there, I looked down and I saw a hinge, and I was like, well, maybe that could be a really cool binding technique. So I went online and found a bunch of different hinges, and thus my experience with extreme bookbinding began. I went online and ordered a bunch of hinges. One of them was, it's about 2 inches, or about half an inch thick, and it's solid steel. It's a little heavy, but I fell in love with it. It was love at first sight when that hinge showed up on my doorstep. And I used it to create the book. So these are some images of the construction. And essentially the book is just a jacket and a folio inside with the hinge running down the center. And I went out to a local roofing contractor, actually, and he helped me to bend the steel. And just 2 pieces of steel folded around. And what this actually really did, and one interesting thing is, whenever we create these books, we usually make them for one purpose. But this book can actually be adapted. You can pull out the pages, change, add whatever you want to, just get it rebound, and it can be reused as a different book. So I really liked that aspect, that it could just change and didn't have to have the same contents the entire time. So this is my last slide that I'll leave you with. It's just images of the book, and I liked it. Thanks for listening.